Welcome back to Season 5 of the Changing Earth podcast with Sarah F. Hathaway, blending survival fiction and fact to bring you entertaining education that will help you dream, survive, and thrive. And now, here's your host, Sarah F. Hathaway.
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the Changing Earth podcast. This is episode number 194, Season 5, episode 31. This today is a very difficult episode for me to record. There's been some severe changes in my life. And, well, first of all, I just want to thank everybody who's given me support along the way. You guys really are what made the Changing Earth go around. And I just really appreciate your support. Especially special shout out to Ellen Kerr for, all the support and love that you've given me. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate that. So unfortunately, I've been trying to make my podcast work for a long time financially, as well as much as it pays off for me to do the show for myself, for you guys. And I've tried different avenues. I've tried to bring in advertising dollars, and then I, asked you guys for your support. And, unfortunately, I just haven't received the amount of support that I thought I would, which really saddens me because I really enjoy doing this show. And I promised myself I wasn't going to cry on the air while I was trying to explain what's going on, but it looks like this is going to be my last season of podcasting. The new books will still be coming out, and you'll still be able to read my material and listen to the audiobooks. But, I need to be making money, and I just don't have enough support from my listeners to call it a viable career. So the plain and simple fact is that currently the homestead that we live in is on the market, and when it sells, I really have no idea where we're going to go or what we're going to do. And so in order to provide financially for my family, I'm going to have to stop podcasting and go ahead and just go back to a regular 9-to-5 job and bite the bullet and get that done for my kids and for my husband, and so that we can, stay financially sound. And it means a lot of big changes for me. I have a really big chicken business that we just really got online, and it's finally making money and stuff, and I won't be able to continue with any of that. And, of course, I'll have to leave my podcast behind, which saddens me more than I can tell you. Podcasting has been one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever done in my life. I have met so many incredible people who have trained me, taught me, educated me, supported me, and I've gotten to share my stories with the world, and I've gotten to help educate you on so many topics that I just can't tell you how rewarding the experience has been. And I really wish that I could have made it work financially, but I got to throw in the towel and do what's necessary for my family. So it's with a really sad heart today that I'm going to let you know that this is going to be my last season of podcasting. We'll be throwing in the towel. So like I say, you'll still be able to find my books, and you'll still be able to listen to me on audiobook. But, the podcast takes up so much of my time as far as all the interviews that I do and laying down the weekly material and that there's just no way I can continue to train, work 40 hours a week and get time with my family with doing the podcast. So, as I mentioned, that's with a really heavy heart that I have to tell you that. So, thank you for everyone who did go out there and show me support. I really appreciate you guys. You don't know what it means to me. So thank you very much. So let's get into the story and past all the sabi BS. Last week in the Dark Days in Denver adventure, we experienced Erica's survival story as she plods along with TJ Swenson. This week, we're going to catch back up with Vince as they re-enter the homesteads and they experience the amount of carnage that was laid out there. So here today is my good buddy that I miss a whole bunch, Skip Buck, and he is here to talk to us today about what to do with these dead bodies, what we're going to experience when we have a lot of carnage lying around us, and ways that we can keep the survivors safe. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the Dark Days in Denver adventure. Chapter 31. Smoke rose up as they crested the hill and looked upon the valley with the homesteads. It looked like winter had arrived early in the valley with the blanket of white ash covering everything, but it was dark and dingy at the same time. The puffs from fires traveled up and joined the haze that dominated the sky since the eruption. Vince stopped for a moment to take in the full scene. "Come on, Dad, we're almost there," Star said, continuing forward. Bennett was bringing up the rear and stood for a second with Vince. "Unbelievable," he commented. "Seriously," Vince agreed. "Come on, guys," Star urged them forward. Vince covered his nose and mouth as they approached the entry gate. Bodies were stacked in piles awaiting burial outside. "Oh my God," Star commented, with tears in her eyes. She was looking over the vast number of fallen people. "Come on," Vince said, urging her on. He saw death on this scale before, right after the Great Quake. The images that he never wanted to remember flooded back to him. They entered through the gate. A familiar face awaited. "Sergeant Walker," Bennett greeted him. "Sir," he saluted. "Sergeant Gleason, Vince, Star," he said, accounting for the group. "Hi, Terrence," Vince greeted him. He looked around curiously. "Where's Erica?" "Between us, taken by the feds," Star answered sadly. "What? Are you serious?" Sergeant Walker asked, his eyes growing wide. "Would we be here without her?" Vince responded. "Must have been some plan to take down Erica Moore," Walker speculated. "They shot me in the head and the chest," Vince told him. "Damn, boy! I hope you got down on your knees and gave thanks to the good Lord above. Typically, you just don't walk away from that, brother. You must have one hell of a guardian angel." Walker was in awe. "Or not. Erica's gone," Vince replied sadly. Sergeant Walker shook his head in agreement but didn't know what to say. Turning to Bennett, he asked, "Looking for Lieutenant General Merkley?" "You know that I am," Bennett agreed. "They have a command tent set up in front of the old yard. The feds blew the hell out of the base," Walker told him. "Do you know if Daniel's okay?" Vince asked. "Daniel and Nancy are alive. Vince, your boy is one hell of a fighter with that sword. That kid in Tillman killed about 15 federal soldiers. It was impressive. Daniel and Nancy are staying with Gear. Tillman survived. He's with Lars, but Mr. Rowan was killed in the fighting, and his home was lost in the bombing." Sighing with relief, Vince almost fainted. Victoria caught his body as he grew weak. "Whoa there, buddy," Bennett commented, helping Victoria shoulder his weight. "You got an extra tent around here, Walker?" "Yeah, there's one available over in the camp," Walker assured him. "Get the hell off me," Vince insisted, regaining his strength and shaking himself free. "I don't need a tent. I need to see my boy and go get my wife." "Okay, Vince, we're just trying to help," Victoria said. "I know, and I appreciate it," Vince apologized. "You two both have people you're worried about, too. Why don't you go take care of it, and we'll meet back up later," Vince suggested. "You sure?" Bennett worried. "Go," Vince assured him. "I'll be fine." Bennett left to go find Michelle and report to Lieutenant General Merkley. Victoria headed off in the other direction, concerned for her family. "Let's go find him," Vince told Star. They walked through the remains of the camp, following paths that were made through the debris. The cleanup effort would be enormous, and it looked to Vince like most people were packing up to evacuate. Word of the success in Denver gave people hope, and many of them were headed out in that direction. Vince knew Denver didn't look much different than this, but he wasn't about to tell them that. People would make their own decisions about their futures. Vince was sickened by the state of the homesteads. They were gone, the food supply annihilated. All that remained were crevices with building parts scattered around. Mr. Rowan's home was non-existent. They turned down the road towards Gear's workshop. It was out in the woods separated from the town.
Daniel was out front, watching the road with Trucker. "Grandma Nancy!" Daniel shouted to the building. "They're back!" Daniel and Trucker took off, sprinting towards Vince and Star. They hugged him tightly in a huge hug while the dog barked and licked at them. Nancy appeared behind him in the doorway as they neared the shop. She exited out into the yard as Gear appeared behind her. He did the same, and his wife Elizabeth appeared behind him. "Oh my God, what happened to you two?" Nancy asked, moving forward to assess their conditions. She stopped and looked around curiously, and then her eyes focused back on Vince. "Where's Erica? And where's Cassidy?" Gear questioned. "Gear," Vince looked at him, hesitating. "No. Oh no," Gear said, understanding the look in his eyes. "She died in the battle," Vince admitted. "Oh, hell no," Gear shouted loudly. He spun in a circle, angrily pulling at his hair. "She died proudly and with courage," Vince assured him. "And what about Erica, Vince?" Nancy implored. "Yeah, Dad. Where's Mom?" Daniel wondered fearfully. Vince didn't want to say it. He didn't want them to know that he had let her be captured. "How could I have let my guard down?" he blamed himself. "What, Vince?" Nancy demanded. "She was captured by the federal forces," Vince said painfully. "It was Merkley's son," Star continued for Vince. "They shot Dad in the head and the chest." Nancy's eyes opened wide at the story. "Are you okay, Vince?" she wondered. "I just want to get Erica back. I know there's still time," Vince fretted, "but the feds bombed the whole northern route. I don't know if my parents survived. We didn't know if you guys lived. Thank God we found you. Thanks, Gear," he concluded, sharing his fears. Gear looked at him with tears in his eyes. "It's me who should thank you, brother. My son Ren was out in the front yard when the soldiers came. Daniel is a natural with the sword. He, Tillman, and Rowan put up one hell of a fight. They took out 9 soldiers armed with automatic weapons. Daniel ran to the house to take Ren to Elizabeth when Mr. Rowan's home was bombed. He was a fine man." Daniel stood proudly with his sword strapped to his back. But he was humble and mourned deeply for his sword master. "How about Ned?" Gear asked curiously. "Ned will be okay. He got shot in the leg and couldn't make the trek by foot just yet," Star told him. "Did you hear anything about my parents or Greg and Penny?" Vince asked Nancy. "No, they got hit hard on the pass. They've been sending runners back and forth with medical supplies, but as you can see, they've been needed badly here as well. I did talk with one of the runners. It was almost impossible to get individual names of survivors," Nancy explained, her eyes filling with tears. Vince sat in a chair Elizabeth offered him. He was deep in thought. His body ached, but his anger and love kept him alert and focused. "What are you going to do, Vince?" Nancy fretted. "I have to go after Erica. I'll talk to Merkley and see how many soldiers he can send with me, but I have to go. We already spent 2 days getting here. Who knows how far they are now? I got to take time to go back," he worried, thinking of details in his head. "I think we could get a buggy running now and maybe shorten that time. I've had a truck in the shop waiting for just this sort of opportunity," Gear commented. "I couldn't ask you for it," Vince told him. "And I wouldn't give it to you. I'm going with you," Gear concluded. "My sister would want me to."
As plans are made to leave, the survivors are left dealing with the dead. And today, Skip Buck is here to talk to us about what this actually means in reality. Skip Buck was adopted at the age of 9, and he was raised in Southern California in the San Gabriel Valley. He attended Rosemead High School and was actively involved in sports, student leadership, choir, and school plays. At the University of Redlands, he was the captain of the football team, earning all district and all conference honors, participated in wrestling, and was president of the Interfraternity Council and a member of Chi Sigma Chi fraternity. He graduated from the University of Redlands in 1979 with a BA in physical education. His college sweetheart, Kathy Morris Buck, and he were married shortly after college, and back when this was written, they were celebrating 36 years of marriage. They have 2 daughters, Morgan and Heather. Both are happily married and successful in their individual pursuits. Skip began his career in law enforcement late in 1981, and he retired in 2008. During his career, he worked custody, patrol, chief coroner's investigator, narcotics task force, SWAT, youth and community services,
family abuse, homicide, felony assault, career criminal apprehension team, child sex assaults, vehicle crimes, and homeland security. He was promoted in 2006 to sergeant and managed patrol teams until his retirement in 2008. His lovely bride and him have moved to Idaho now, where they are enjoying their retirement. So let's go ahead and welcome Skip to the show. Today, I am super thrilled to be back with my good buddy, Skip Buck. And you guys all know him that have been listening to my show. Former sheriff sergeant and just great guy all the way around. So Skip, thank you so much for taking the time to spend it with me today.
Sarah, as you know, I'm thrilled to be here. Miss you so much having moved to Northern Idaho, but not so much missing California as we miss you and your lovely family.
I hear that, we're still putting up with Cali, and I'm hoping I can rally up some of the survivalist community out here to start representing, because there's a lot of us here. We just seem to be on the down low. So I'm trying to get that moving right now so we can do some events over here and have some fun with it.
Excellent.
So Skip, why don't you just go ahead, brief introduction, I just read your bio and everything, but a brief introduction, just get everybody lit up on what you do and what you did.
Okay. I was in law enforcement for 28 years. I worked for sheriffs and police departments, a number of agencies. I finished with about 20 years with the Sacramento Police Department and retired as a sergeant on patrol. But I've worked coroner's investigations, corrections, narcotics task force, SWAT, juvenile crime, family abuse, child sex assaults, homicide, career criminal apprehension team, homeland security, most everything but bikes and air operations. Really, that's about it. And canines. I always had my own dogs, and I didn't want to put them out having to favor a work dog, but that's something I kind of missed in my career that I wish I would have had an opportunity. But then after that, as you know, we met when I became a personal trainer. We opened up a gym there in Cool, and we enjoyed our time there. Currently, my wife and I now have moved to Northern Idaho, and we're enjoying a bit more relaxed atmosphere than California, a place where we found that you can say, have a great day and God bless you, and you don't go to jail. So we're enjoying it. We enjoyed our first winter here. We really didn't get hit much with winter until late February, and it didn't seem like it was going to leave, but that's what you experienced in California too. So it was pretty much all the West Coast. But anyway, right now, just retired and enjoying the good life, and I'm involved in scouts and a few things up here, but that's about it. And just happy to do this podcast.
I know, I'm so jealous. I'm like, oh man, I can't do it though, not yet. I still have a little bit of faith here, and man, my martial arts community is what it's all about. So
yep.
All right, so today we're talking dead bodies, and this is something that I haven't touched on my show before, even though a lot of them appear in my book. So doing research on this topic was kind of interesting because I've never really seen a dead body before, besides when my grandpa passed away or something like that, in a coffin, and they're kind of all cleaned up at that point and taken care of. So I know that you've dealt a lot with this, so I was like, all right, Skip, let's go through it. So what does a dead body that you find or in a mass casualty situation, what's that going to look and kind of smell like? How's that going to really affect our senses?
Well, I will precede that by saying that a lot of my experience was as the chief deputy coroner for Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department, North County. We had a chief deputy coroner that was in the South County, handled Santa Barbara all the way up to Gaviota State Beach, and then I had from Gaviota State Beach to Santa Maria to the San Luis Obispo County line. During that period of time, I experienced, and I have to say experienced because it is an experience, over 500 autopsies. So a lot of my experience was actually in the autopsy room. But of course, you're also going to the scene where these bodies are found, and generally the coroner's involved. If it's an unattended death, if there's no physician that can vouch for the cause of death, that's seen that patient within 60, actually it's 20 days, but in California, but in some states it's 60. In any event, that's the encounter. So I would come up to the scene, and then in whatever stage the body's in, I would view it. remove it, and after taking all photos and any samples I would take, and then I had keys to all the mortuaries, and I took them in there, whether it was nighttime, daytime, middle of the morning, whatever. And then in the morning, I would scoop them right back up, somewhere in between making death notification, which is something into itself, another conversation for another time. But in any event, a lot of exposure to the bodies during that time. Then I would take them to Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara, and we would complete the autopsy, which, depending on the nature of the death, depends on the duration of the autopsy. But generally, they start the exact same way and they finish the exact same way. That being said, I was a neophyte when it came to this as well. I had experienced the death of family members, my father, the other family members that had passed. I had seen it in a very sterile environment, as you'd mentioned. The bodies that are already treated by the mortuaries, or just recently deceased, where you say your goodbyes and the body's moved on by the coroner's investigator or the mortuary. Having that in mind, my eyes were opened. My first experience, as I recall, was a female Marine that was killed. She'd had a big discussion that grew very verbal with her husband, left the house, went to a bar, which was not her normal, drank way too much, met with a Mexican national. They did lines of coke on a bathroom toilet, and then she split out to the fields with him, where she thought she was going to have an amorous time. And at that time, I think she had a bit of guilt and a remorse and said no to this fella. And then they proceed to both get in their separate cars in the strawberry field in North Santa Maria and drive. She made it about 100 yards before she impaled herself into a telephone pole. So I get to the scene and she looks perfectly normal. This is just outside the strawberry field. She's been transported now to the mortuary, and there's a little bit of blood on her forehead, but not much. And now I've got to stick needles in her chest and draw blood from her heart, stick needles in her liver, and to try to get a time of death, even though she's been transported. And then also needles into her bladder to draw urine. I fought gagging horrifically, and this is a recently deceased. My eyes would open later as I continued. Oh, I lost you.
There we go.
There we go. My eyes would and nose would be open later as I continued in the Coroner's Investigations Bureau and experienced bodies that had been dead over a period of time. So my initial encounter was rough. It got worse.
Like breaking you in kind of softly, though.
When a body has expired, within 15 minutes they begin to decompose, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. And that's with normal temperatures. Obviously, if it's much more humid or heat, it's going to decompose more rapidly, and with cold weather, much more slowly. Okay. But anyway, when you first see a dead body, you're going to note that the skin is very pale and waxy. It very much will reveal or resemble the wax figures you've seen in the wax museums. If you've ever been to San Francisco or a place that has a wax museum, it looks as if you could pull it back and it wouldn't come back to place. Your skin is pliable. Well, you pull it and it kind of moves back. It looks as if you pulled it, it wouldn't really go back. And that's just after a very short period of time. Now, with the passing of time, up to about 4 hours, the body starts to resume the temperature of its natural surroundings. And that's when you're getting a lot of the degradation and the decomposition effects. At that point in time now, you're starting to see post-mortem lividity. Now, if you think about a body as a vessel, and you turn that vessel, let's say for the body's sake, onto its face, that lividity is now going to be on that half, the prone half of the body, the whole. But if you could draw a line from half of the body down, that's where the blood is going to pool. Okay. And if you were to roll that body over, you're going to see a lot of things that are not familiar to you. You're going to see a very purple, bluish corpse. It's going to be very, very dark in color. Sometimes, as I say, almost bluish. Mm-hmm. Then the other thing you're going to see is pressure blanching. Now, pressure blanching merely means the contact points that body has with objects. For example, let's be real graphic. If that body is on its stomach and it's on some form of an object, let's say a marking pen, a video case, something, and that nose is pushed to the side, the tip of the nose that's not involved with being directly in contact with the lowest point of the body is now going to be white. It's going to be blanched. And you're going to know that there was an object there. This is why in law enforcement, oftentimes when you get to a scene, you look at the body and you go, this body was dumped here. It was not dead at this scene. They were dead at another location and then moved to this location. And generally speaking, again, that's about 4 hours you start seeing the post-mortem lividity. Now, 12 to 24 hours is your rigor mortis. We've all heard that name, and it's kind of a cool, the dawn of the dead awakening term.
That with like animals all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Rigor mortis basically means stiffness of the body, and stiffness of the dead, mortis meaning dead. And so that's when you start seeing different, particularly extremities affected first, becoming stiff and difficult to move. And in this particular case with a body, let's again take that body that's now, let's say, laying on its back, it's facing upright. And you're going to move that body. If the arms are straight, if you begin to grab an arm, you're physically, if you want to bend that arm, physically going to have to break the rigor. And it actually makes a popping kind of a sound as the muscles release and the fluids empty from the upper half of the body to the lower half of the body. But it will make a popping sound. And the thing I haven't mentioned yet, and now we'll get to, if you're at this point now where rigor has set, you have post-mortem lividity already on the body. The post-mortem lividity, again, should be consistent with the position of the body, or that body's been moved or dumped or whatever been acted upon at post-mortem.
Okay.
You're going to see, you should see that if it has been moved. Not that you were looking for this from an investigatory standpoint, but again, something to be aware of.
Yeah.
So now these particular organs inside this body have began to deteriorate. And that's where you get the stench. And when I say stench, think about eating your baby's first diaper. That's all I can say. There is nothing to describe when you have been around a body that's not just recently, but some period of time deceased, and they're beginning to decompose. The stench is like nothing that you'll ever smell. Now, animals in the wild, you can experience a degree. We've all had that. You're out hiking and you come across something that's been dead for a while, and you get the smell, you walk away. But again, you're in an enclosed environment, and you're not dealing with something as large, generally speaking, as human body.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And also, in an open environment like that, you're starting to have activities that have already occurred, so that some of that smell is gone. If you have an intact body and that smell is still there, you're having the body decompose internally, so that those organs are becoming a very liquid gel type of material. As that gel begins to degrade even further, now it starts to seep out of the orifice of the body. Now, the orifices of the body, we're talking about the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the bowels, and the bladder. So the bowels and the bladder by this time have been vacated. And again, that's the least of your concern. You probably won't even notice the smell of feces or urine like you obviously would in a normal circumstance, because the stench is so great. And again, that only continues to get worse as time progresses, or in more hot or humid environments.
Oh, that's disgusting. So it literally is like turning to liquid and then like seeping out of the body.
It tends to seep out of the body. And kind of a side note here, I just had a little note. I've told you this story. I have a rather sordid sense of humor. And apologies to those folks out there that aren't used to gallows or law enforcement style humor. I apologize because you see so many things that at times you have to find a way to try to make light of it. And I've told you the story, and I think you're probably already giggling knowing what's coming. But I had a forensic pathologist. The deaners assist the forensic pathologist, and they were very good people to work with and taught me a lot, including how to cut off fingers to take fingerprints and how to cut ribs open. And anyway, a lot of things I don't care to talk about. So now we had a diver that had been out at sea for 30 plus days. And we found the diver. He was wearing a wetsuit, with short arms, short sleeves, short legs. We were sure this was the diver, but this was my first experience where we did not want to obviously have anyone come and identify this particular body. We were sure this was the solo diver, which is a poor thing to do. Obviously, if you're divers out there, you don't do this. We've heard a lot of things like this soldier that's missing. You don't hike alone.
Yep.
There's a lot of things that you should, a partner, or at least somebody knows exactly where you're going and what your itinerary is, and diving is one of those. He had gone by himself solo, and I won't mention the beach because somebody might know him, but anyways, in the Santa Barbara County area. And when we found him, again, it was with a fishing boat that was first gaffed him and brought him in. When they brought him into the room to do the autopsy at the hospital, this wetsuit looked like one of the cartoon jokes where you blow it up with air, and it's just exceedingly bulbous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what it looked like, and I didn't realize until they cut off, still being fairly new to the business, they cut off the wetsuit, that wasn't the wetsuit, it was the body. The gases had really expanded more than I still to date have ever seen, without the body, because of the cooler temperatures of the ocean, having burst. That will normally happen once the gases reach critical mass. There will be bursting somewhere, and these gases will flow out, and the fluids will flow out, and the intensity of the smell continues. So we began this autopsy with a forensic pathologist who starts his very nasal dictation. And he says the following is the uninvolved body of a male Caucasian, approximately so many centimeters by so many kilos of weight, blah, blah, blah. And he began the incision from the umbilicus to the xiphoid process, which means the belly button to the sternum. Okay. Mm-hmm. As he did that, we had about 45 seconds to a minute of never in my life had I smelled something like this. I could not even believe it. So the forensic pathologist, who, like I said, has done this his lifetime, he has always been a forensic pathologist who was so stoic. When we were bothered before by odors of burnt bodies, etc., he hung in there, and we had to hang in there because he did.
Right.
He said, "Let's take a coffee break." So we took a coffee break. And as you know, the rest of the story, I snuck back in with a purge mask because I just could not stand the smell before our coffee break was over. And I put in a battery-powered crawling hand inside the chest cavity. So as we started this autopsy again, he began the whole process of beginning the autopsy of case number so-and-so, so many kilos, so many centimeters or height, blah, blah, blah. He opens it, and he goes, "Damn it, Buck." And he put the crawling hand on the inner's table. It started knocking instruments off. That was all the rise I got out of this man. That's how stoic he was. Most of us will not be able to potentially even think of that. There will be vomiting. Yeah. It is extreme.
Brock would definitely be losing it like crazy. I can't even guarantee I wouldn't. I mean, that's horrible.
I had another case where an individual had been reported missing by his family. And we actually found him at his house, and he had had a very, very bad flu. He was an elderly person, and had been approximately 30 days under a very high temperature electric blanket.
Uh-huh.
So after we removed the body, which in itself was an ordeal, all these fluids had leaked out. Of course, by now you have insect activity, which also means crawling with larvae, and flies so thick that you can't see out the windows. And we removed the body. We put our masks on to try to get the smell out. People say smoke a cigar or put Vicks in your nose. Those help, but it doesn't get rid of it. When I got home that night, I had a pair of dress shoes on, and they were leather soled. I did not realize that I had stepped, as we carried the mattress out of the house to try to help the family out, not having to have them do that, that I'd stepped in some of the body fluids. Those shoes thrown away. I bleached them. There was nothing I could do to get rid of that stench. So that's the kind of smell I'm talking about that you're dealing with. And imagine that in the mass casualties incident. So yeah, it's intense.
Yeah.
Anyway, I kind of covered that. Maybe over covered it.
So when we have these dead bodies, do they pose this serious risk to survivors? Like, everybody worries about getting diseases from the bodies. So is that for real?
Yes, that's for real. And particularly if you leave this body unattended, let's say let's just talk about a natural disaster. My kitty's trying to play with things up here. A natural disaster now. And let's say that you formed kind of your own little community. You've got 20 people, and one of the people in your group was feeling ill when this event first started, now has been overcome by the illness. It's nothing dramatic. Maybe it's an influenza or pneumonia, whatever, something of a basal nature.
Normal.
And they pass. And now they're part of your group, and you need to think about, what's our next step here? The first step you need to consider is you don't want insect or animal activity. Now, it sounds like an easy fix. If you can relocate your community, and that's an easy fix, yeah, maybe that's what you do, since you're only dealing with one body now. But probably in this circumstance now, you're still going to want some respect for the dead. So you're going to try to perhaps bury this body or cremate the body, whatever is easiest or more convenient for your group. If you don't do it within a reasonable period of time, you are going to have insect activity. You're going to have larvae that is laid from the flies into the body. You're going to have the potential of even airborne contaminants from that body. And then you got to worry about, if you do cremate the body, now you might have some particulate matter that also might spread this disease or this particular, whatever the ailment was, to the rest of the members of your party. So it does become an issue. Obviously, the more bodies, the more intensity, the more likelihood of the potential of spreading a plague even. So yeah, it can be as egregious as whatever it was killed this person or persons. And it can be easily spread. That's why anytime you move a body, you bury a body, if you can, you at all possible, you want as much protective gear as you can have. Eyes, nose, mask, gloves, boots, whatever you have. If you've got a level C containment suit, put it on, whatever it is, in order to move those bodies and be less impaired. When we move bodies, in the Coroner's Bureau, generally speaking, we weren't exposed, but if we thought we were going to be, we had at least a purge mask on, we had eye protection, and we had gloves on and boots.
Okay. So it's best to just be safe, not sorry, right?
Be safe, not sorry. Can you relocate your group? Do you need to bury this body? Is it still at that point in this crisis where you can pay respect for the dead, bury them or cremate them in whichever manner you think they might have wanted, and provide some kind of a placard or marker for the grave? Great. But as things start hitting the fan, those likelihoods are going to be less and less.
So you talked about the protective clothing. Should definitely put it on. Do that. If we were in this grid down type, situation or a natural disaster even, who do you think, who do you see kind of stepping up to take charge of this? Somebody's going to have to do it, right?
Absent the whole big involvement of, just mass casual, natural disasters, within each county, there's a Coroner's Bureau. And the Coroner's Bureau is actually responsible for those deaths. Now, with most agencies in California now, most of the Coroner's Bureaus, at least the smaller agencies, the deputies are also deputy coroners. So you're actually saying each of the law enforcement entities within, say, El Dorado County, for example, is an example, are representatives of the coroner's office. So initially, it would be law enforcement in the coroner's office that would arrive, take care of the processing these bodies, if mortuaries are available, and remove them, or if they had mass graves or collection facilities, they would do that initially. But if you're talking again a natural disaster, I'll tell you, like Sacramento County coroner's investigations, there's probably 500,000 people in the city of Sacramento alone. They handle the city, not the county, because the county has their own coroner's bureau. But now you're talking probably about 12 to 15 investigators. So the city doesn't have that luxury, because the city police officers are not also sworn as coroner's investigators. So they would have to get mutual aid from the county of Sacramento, for an example. El Dorado County is an agency that has sworn coroner's investigator and investigators that are under that office, but the rest of the deputies are also deputy coroners, so you'd have some assistance there. As you well know, as this thing begins to escalate, if it is a mass casualty circumstance, you're going to have to rely on your community. And The community is going to have to outweigh the needs of the community versus the needs of the deceased. And the needs of the deceased, unfortunately, at this point in time, are going to take a very, very distant back seat. So you're going to have to decide, do we have enough fuel, combustible materials, et cetera, to cremate these bodies? Do we have enough manpower or access to some type of a digging device, a backhoe, which probably you don't. If you do, the fuel is probably minimal.
Yeah.
And if it's diesel fuel helps to burn bodies, but it helps to move equipment. And you have to weigh your options there. And sometimes the mass grave is, what is done if you have enough manpower and you have shovels that can do this. But again, that's an arduous task. One of the circumstances that I've read about recently, and unfortunately, some of the serial killers have used this type of a model, is the Dakota pit. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Yep.
And basically what that is to dig a pit at least 6 foot deep, at least 8 foot wide, at least 12 foot in length. And you have alternate air sources to this particular pit. You can either have another channel or a tunnel that comes down to it below the base of it to allow for air, because bodies are going to burn at a very high temperature. And if you are going to decide to cremate these bodies, you're going to need high temperature and continual flame and continual heat, not flame necessarily. But so the Dakota pit now, you would put a combustible material on the bottom of that. You would have 12 to 18 inches, some type of an air ventilation system. Sometimes if you have additional piping you found around from destroyed structures, PVC will work for a while if you protect it and leave it for far enough in the sand, but eventually, obviously, that's going to melt and close up. So you're going to need something that will allow it to continue to vent. You might have that separate chamber down into the Dakota pit that in and by itself is going to be a difficult thing to dig, particularly in your area. You've got lots of hard stone.
Yeah.
So you're digging through, and then you would put the body on top of the combustible material, some form of accelerant. And then if you have additional bodies, you can put additional bodies on top of that accelerant, add more accelerant, more combustible materials. Essentially, you're doing like a pig cooking chamber.
Yep.
And you're able to remove the ash from this once the bodies are done. You want to be downwind from this, obviously. Again, you'd be concerned about particulate matter in the air from the smoke. And again, it's going to take some high heat to burn these bodies and cremate them.
Yeah, and you're using up a lot of your combustible materials there.
Yeah, and if you have fuel issues, which likely you will as the event continues over time, it may not be worth dealing with the bodies altogether. You might have to relocate the community or relocate the bodies to another location and allow nature to take care of them. The problem with that is you're asking for animals from miles around and insects from miles and miles around that are going to take immediate residence in those bodies and make a meal out of them. And
so in Day After Disaster, I did throw them over the cliff that nobody basically goes down. So that would kind of be a mess.
And that is an adventure. Or you move to more of a mountaintop facility, or you move the bodies to a mountaintop facility and all the vultures to take care of them. If you're near water, it's not a great solution, particularly if that's your drinking source. But you've got a river, they're going to go downriver. And if you're drinking upriver, that might be a possibility. They will
for all the people downriver.
Exactly. They will float for a period of time, and then they will float even better. So, but anyway, those are some of the things to consider.
So how could the mismanagement of these dead people? Well, how could that create so many problems for the people that survive? We're talking about either a natural disaster or a cataclysmic man-made event that continues with time. You are going to obviously have more and more mass casualties. As you have more and more mass casualties, now you have the probability that you're going to have a plague formed or something very, very disastrous to your community of survivors. Right,
and
so they're going to have rodents coming in for those bodies now, and they're
absolutely it's like London, the Black Plague. If you remember Monty Python, Bring Out Your Dead.
Yep.
That's not really completely a joke. That's pretty much what they did after they recognized that all the dead bodies that were thrown around the streets and just they're decaying. We're bringing in the rodents. The rodents brought in Black Plague.
Yep.
And that's not That's not a fantasy, or it's not a Monty Python
Yeah,
episode.
it still
It's a
exists
reality.
down south, right? The rats are still carrying it down there. It's becoming a problem because of what they're doing to Southern California.
Exactly. And the potential too, flies easily spread, the minute particles. And that's, how do you get rid of flies? And the more flies you have, the more maggots in the bodies you have, which means the more flies you have, et cetera. And the greater putrefaction and disintegration of the bodies, which is what you want. But again, it presents a immediate health hazard to your group. So it's gonna be a very difficult management problem, and one that you have to balance based on the needs of your community that's surviving, versus getting rid of another potential threat at this time. You're not worried about respect for the dead. It's a potential threat.
My thought too was, say it's an event that lasts like just 8 months to a year, right? Say it was just a hiccup type thing.
Uh-huh.
And, so people were digging mass graves and just burying tons of people there. And, once we're through the stuff, the survivors are like, well, what happened to my family member? Right. So trying to ID bodies after that would be like, forget it.
Exactly. That's a terrible tragedy that would unfortunately be a necessity, I think, in order to survive with your small communities that you form. Probably, hopefully, that's what would happen, is people would at least start finding their own little small communities to assist one another and survive the episode. And the other thing that you have down the road, let's say it's 8 months or a year that this lasts, is now, have we contaminated groundwater? Have we contaminated soil for future planting? In a way, they become fertilizer, and that might not be a bad thing altogether as far as planting, but there's a lot of other issues.
You put it by a groundwater source, and you didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. And will these bodies, if they weren't sufficiently buried, now be ravaged later after the incident's over by animals? As time, we've eroded the soil, and now they're exposed. And I'm thinking just quickly here, they just discovered an airplane that's been missing in Alaska since 1952. There was like 50 soldier or airmen that were lost in that, and they never found it until now. We've got some recent erosion, and that's a long time ago, And so now let's forward it, 10 years even. That soil, a lot of soil that was 6 foot under, is now topsoil. And if we created a problem, maybe not. Yeah. By then, hopefully, most of the particulate matters, anything that might cause any future problems, are gone. But I'm not sure.
Right. That's interesting. So you talked a lot about the respect for the dead. Taking that back seat. That's kind of a mark of our humanity, right? Of how we care for our dead, and it sets us apart from, well, when they figured out Neanderthals cared for their dead, it put them up to like a new evolutionary level. Basically, it's kind of important on a scale, right? So, I don't know. That's kind of disconcerting to me that we would be like, whatever. But
if you had a group that was conscientious enough, you could probably arrange some form of documentation. But that would probably not be involving grave markers if you're doing mass graves. It might be gravesite A, and here's the 30 people that are in your book, but they're on paper. And if that 8 months to a year passes, you've recorded it, and maybe you have a remembrance of that death, but it certainly wouldn't probably behoove you with your group to expose your group to the dangers of the deceased, in order to provide a record for the living down the road. I think it's one of those things that would be a very difficult moral decision, but definitely very ethical for your surviving group.
Pull out like 3 teeth.
Yeah, something.
I don't know.
Quick Polaroid of the dental work, and
maybe, depends on what hits. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So how about because obviously if we're planning for some type of major catastrophe, or even if it's just a, natural disaster, how about like chemicals that we could keep on hand for preservation of that body? If we know it's just going to be a short-term thing and we don't want to be exposed to all this nastiness, or disinfecting chemicals to help us out when we're handling these kinds of things, stuff like that?
Well, obviously, if you think about the intensity of the smell and the intensity of the degradation and the um, decomposition of the body, you have to equal that with with chemicals that will deal with something like that. So think about your most pungent chemicals, your bleaches, as far as getting rid of antiseptically trying to keep you from getting whatever it is that that corpse had. Obviously, a bleach or something of a solvent of that type is highly regarded. It's also not without its own problems too. It's an inhalation problem. Chlorine is another thing we don't think about. So if you have pools nearby or a pool facility, don't like to think this way, but the crooks do. Lye. Lye is a way to help in a solution to get rid of the actual body. And if you have the body in lye in a solution, the activity of the bugs and the animals is going to be minimalized because the lye is so intense in itself. And
we think that it comes from ash and when we burn, right?
Yes.
Our pits.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then another thing, I don't think we'd be at this level of skill. My wife and I, in our go bag, are a little weird, but we do have syringes, multiple syringes. We also have syringes that allow, and we have enough lidocaine we could do surgeries. So we have also the surgical tubing. If you wanted to talk about, say, preserving a few bodies, you could actually embalm by removing the blood fluids and getting rid of those and actually embalming them if you had some type of embalming fluid. The actual embalming fluids you would probably get only if you were nearby a mortuary and raided it somewhere in the process. They aren't chemically available to us, which is a good thing because there's some bad people out there that probably use them. But within that too, it reminds me of a circumstance. When you are removing fluids from the body and replacing fluids in the body, I found this out having night keys to the mortuaries. The bodies move. And when you're filling the bodies back with embalming fluid, it's not uncommon. It's not an everyday experience, but it does happen where the bodies will sit up and or arms will move towards the medium point. In other words, if the arms are straight, which generally they are embalmed straight, the arms will bend. You will see that. And I actually had an experience that I thought I was losing my mind, where I walked into a particular mortuary in Santa Maria. And as I came in, a body sat up about a third of the way. And this was a body without any sheet over it. Now it was being embalmed. And I thought that somehow I'd imagined it until I went over and saw that it physically was off of the table, partly, from the low back up. And that also can occur as you are cremating the bodies. They'll assume what they call the pugilistic pose, which I'm sure you've heard of, where the body will start, as the fluids leave the body, to move towards the center. The knees may move towards the upper chest, and the upper body moves towards the knees, and the hands will come up into almost a fighting kind of a position where they're in front of the body. Not to be concerned that you buried or cremated a dead body, in this case cremated, but that's one of the effects of that, potentially. And another effect will be the explosion of skulls. If the temperatures of your cremation reach a certain temperature, you'll have explosions, and they're pretty loud.
Like wet rocks, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So something else to think about. But again, chemical-wise, yeah, any type of disinfectants that you can find that are normal, I mean, and you're sure they're safe, is better than nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about the fuel needs? So do you think it's more relevant to use those fuels to get rid of the bodies, or for the survivors, basically? Because a lot of the stories that I read on like mass casualties, they were like, we used up all our wood to burn the bodies, and then they were screwed.
There's two things you're talking about: the combustibles that you'd use to help start your normal fires to survive for warmth and or for food preparation, and again your fuels, which can be used for a various number of things, either diesel or gas or whatever fuels you have. Again, starting fires too. much easier. I'd say that it's the old Kant, the utilitarian principles, the need of the many outweighs the need of the few. And in this case, those that are deceased don't have a voice. And I'd say, yeah, you're probably better off considering burial first as a first alternative, if that's possible within the community that you're with. If it's, a few people and there are a few corpses and you have a number of people that can assist, that's the first option. That's probably the best option. And another might be to actually relocate your community if you're not already embedded. You don't have things growing, you don't have shelters built, etc. And then finally, as a last resort, utilizing some of your fuel if you need to. But I agree. I think the fuel for the survivors is much more important.
And like you say, it's not just easy to light a body up. You can't just
It's not.
It doesn't just burn.
You can't go hold a lighter to it and say move back and go, wow, that's great. But it's difficult.
The clothes will burn off, and there's so much fat that drips out of that, and it'll put the fire out actually.
Absolutely, and the fluids as well will put the fire out. And then the next thing you might consider is there's other things that you might be able to burn once you get to a certain temperature, but they're equally toxic too, like rubber. They used to use rubber to burn, bodies, but again, that creates its own toxins. So, not a great solution, not a great scenario.
Right, I know. That's why I was like, wow, this is really.
But dead people are cool.
So, what if it's too cold?
If it's too cold,
have people die in the winter. What do you?
If you can wrap the bodies, if there's anything to wrap them in, and then put them into basically cold storage like snow or snow banks, or even a shed or a facility, if there's not snow on the ground, that is okay. As they start to defrost, their smell will become more apparent and be more of an attractant again for flies. Although if it's wintertime, not flies as much, but certainly other animals. So the best thing at that point is
animals still come to get them. Like if you had them just wrapped and outside in a snowbank, would they?
They still will. There's still a smell, and we may not detect it, but they will. And it's still a concern that they may come in, and now you've got bears and mountain lions and other things you don't want around your community.
I didn't think about that, because you think back in the Old West or whatever, or Minnesota, somebody dies in the wintertime, you're not digging a hole for them.
Yeah.
There's no way. So they would put them outside or whatever till spring came. But you'd still have stuff.
Still can be a problem for the animals. Yeah. So if there was something you could wrap them, obviously, you'd be very fortunate to have rolls of gardening visqueen or something of that nature to wrap them in. But plastic or something that's non-porous would be the best alternative.
Because it's going to block the smell.
A little bit, it's going to help with blocking the smell. But again, probably not going to have that luxury.
Yeah, but you'd probably be using it so you could grow food in the wintertime.
Exactly. Yeah, or for shelter purposes from rain or inclement weathers, or who knows. Yeah,
very great. Well, very cheerful topic there.
Hopefully people weren't eating breakfast this morning and trying to view them.
Trying to listen to it.
Yeah.
Well, do you think there's anything that we haven't covered that we really need to be heads up on when it comes to dealing with?
Nothing I can think of. I will say one advantage, if there is any, is once you've actually truly smelled a decomposing body, is if you encounter it in your normal life or activities, you will know it. And I've had that happen on a couple of occasions. It's such a distinctive and offensive smell that it can be an advantage if you're looking for a deceased body. And that actually occurred with me working law enforcement, where I just said, hey, let me go out and I'll keep looking and I'll find it. And I did on a couple of occasions.
Well, that's because you got that huge nose on you.
Well, it's because of the big nose too.
Right,
Air is free. If air is free, my nose just gets bigger and bigger. All right. I know where you live.
Well, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
All right, dear. Miss you.
Thanks so much, Skip, for taking time out of your day to spend it with me and talk about, very cheery subjects such as what do we do with these dead bodies, but it was definitely something that needed to be gone through because it's an issue that we're going to be facing if we're faced with any type of natural disaster, really. Thanks once again to all of my supporters. I really appreciate everyone who showed up to the plate and made their contribution and showed how much the podcast really means to them. You know, it's as simple as $22 a month is basically like buying me a pizza a month, and I didn't think that was too much to ask for. So if you'd like to become a supporter, keep the show going. I need a whole lot of support from you guys. And you can do that at www.authorSarahFhathaway.com/support. That's www.authorSarahFhathaway.com/support. And honestly, guys, that's the only way the show is going to keep going, because I have to be able to provide for my family. And so you got to do what you got to do in life. And unfortunately, there isn't time to do both podcasting and work, you know, a 40-hour-a-week job where I'm bringing money in for everybody. So that's the only way the show is going to keep going at this point. So if you're interested in keeping it going and you couldn't live without the Changing Earth podcast, keep them going on. I had a lot of great plans in store for the seasons coming up, but you know, it is what it is, and we just put one foot in front of the other. So if you are interested in seeing the show go on, you can go ahead and show your support at www.authorSarahFhathaway.com/support. Thank you guys so much for listening and being part of the Changing Earth podcast. You guys are awesome, and I loved being part of it every moment, and loved having all your feedback and getting to hear from how you love the stories and the information. So until next time, remember, dream, survive, thrive.
Thank you for joining Sarah for this episode of the Changing Earth podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Day After Disaster, Without Land, The Walls of Freedom, Battle for the South, and Dark Days in Denver at www.authorSarahFhathaway.com. If you love Sarah's books and this podcast, please head over to Amazon or iTunes and let everyone know by leaving a review.